to Removing Our Blinders. My name is Mary Del Hayes, and I'm here as part of the Together SC team. It is really exciting to see so many friends, new and old and in between. And gosh, I would really like to be with some of you in person and give you a big hug around the neck, but I'm glad that we can be here and have this conversation today. Together SC is really excited to welcome everyone here, and I want to do the brief commercial and make sure that you're engaging with all of the wonderful opportunities for you and your staff to make sure that you're getting the most that you can out of your membership with Together SC. Please make sure that your profiles are up to date in Member Compass. It's a great way to make sure that your staff has access to their peer networks. We've got great peer networks available for development, operations, like nonprofit leaders, and so much more. So please do make sure that you're taking advantage of those opportunities. And if you have any questions about them, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Alex, and we will try to get you to the right place. And today we are going to have a really great conversation. I wish that we were in person down on Pawleys Island with our guests today. But I am going to be turning it over to Dr. Tracy Bailey, who is the founder and executive director of Freedom Readers in the Georgetown area. And Dr. Tracy is going to facilitate a conversation with Ray Funnye, who's one of the board members at the Bunnelle Foundation, and Geales Sand, who's the executive director of the Bunnelle Foundation. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you, Mary Del. I really appreciate that introduction. And like you, I wish that we all were together in Pawleys Island this morning, because I'm pleased to report that the weather here on the coast is gorgeous. It is beautiful. I am always happy to be a part of any event that Together SC is putting together. It was one of the first things that I did after I started Freedom Readers back in 2010, joined Together SC, and I've never regretted it. It has been one of the best decisions that I've made. This morning, I'm so happy to get you all excited about a wonderful conversation we're going to be having with Geales and Ray. As Mary Del said, Geales is the executive director of the Bunnelle Foundation, and she's a mom and a grandmom and just a fine person, just a great leader in the Georgetown area. Geales will tell us in a second why, after she received an invitation from Together SC to tell her story, that she invited me and Ray to be a part of it. But I also want you to know that Ray is going to be here, and he's a board member at Together at the Bunnelle Foundation, as we've heard, but he's also a community servant leader. And there couldn't be two better people for you to hear from today. And so I'm going to first turn this over to Geales to talk a bit about the journey that we've taken to get here, and then to tell us a little bit about her story and her background and how race has shaped it. Geales?
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Can you all hear me? Okay, I'm seeing heads nodding. Okay, good. So good morning. I'm both honored and intimidated to be addressing you all in this forum. Together SC thought that my personal story might be helpful to some of you, so here it goes. I grew up on the white privileged side of the Jim Crow South in Shreveport, Louisiana. I remember whites only signs on the water fountains at Sears Roebuck and on the front door of the barbecue joint we went to. There were separate waiting rooms and doctor's offices, and I seem to recall we even had segregated gas stations. Only Gulf stations served people of color, as I recall. The beach we visited every summer on the Mississippi Gulf Coast was also whites only, and I don't believe that changed until the 1970s. If you read the book The Help or saw the movie, you had a pretty good look at what it was like to grow up in the Deep South in the 50s and 60s. I can really identify with the little girl in the book, Mae Mobley. Her experience was very reflective of my own. Here are the facts. I was the youngest of 3 children. My father was a physician and my mother was a housewife but she certainly was not a stay-at-home mom because she was always on the go, volunteering as a pink lady at the hospital, playing in a bowling league, playing mahjong every Wednesday. And what made this life possible for my mother was the presence of Hattie, who came to work for my family when she was about 15 years old. Back then, it was more important for Hattie to have an income than an education. And although she was young, my parents probably, I think she fibbed about her age, and nobody was really pressing her on that. My husband likes to say that I was raised by remote control because Hattie did a whole lot of the raising. She worked for us 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, for a whopping $40. That's $1 an hour. For as long as I can remember, Hattie was waiting at home for me after school with an after-school snack and lots of conversation. She cooked our meals, she cleaned the house, she did the laundry, and raised the three of us. If you find me hard to get along with, you should probably take it up with Hattie. She's 87 and living in Shreveport with her family, and we are in regular contact, especially right around now when it's Mother's Day. I attended private schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. I entered Catholic school in the 7th grade, the same year it was integrated in 1966, long before the public schools integrated 3 years later. My first foray into public school was when I entered LSU. My first experience with a teacher of color was also at LSU with Monsieur Plus, who was my French teacher. In short, there were always people of color in my life, but most of them were either employed by my family or casual acquaintances. So that's my growing up story. And now, Tracy, are you going to introduce Ray or am I?
Well, I just wanted to jump in there for a second and thank you so much for sharing that story, Geales. I know it took a lot of courage on your part, and it probably resonates very deeply with a lot of the people who are listening to you. I know not all of us on the call are from the South, but many of us will probably identify aspects of your story with that will just really touch something in our hearts. So thank you for doing that. I just want to remind everybody on the call that you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of Geales and Ray as we go along. You can drop those questions into the chat, and then I'll be checking with Alex and she can ask those questions out loud. So now that we've heard all
Wait a minute.
about go ahead.
Mary Dale, did you show the picture? There you go.
Oh.
Thanks.
Now, doesn't this melt your heart on a Wednesday morning? There's little Geales. Geales, I believe you said you were 4 years old when this picture was taken?
I am 4 years old and I'm a flower girl in a wedding.
There could be nothing more precious on the planet that we could look at right now, I think, Geales. That just really is the cherry on top of the sundae that you just gave us in the story of your life. Now, I know that you invited Ray, who's one of your board members, to join you for this conversation because you really, just tell us why you wanted Ray to be a part of this conversation. You knew that you wanted to share your story, but what significance does Ray's story have in all of this?
Stop it.
Ooh. The more we talked about this, I just didn't think that my own growing up story as a standalone, I thought so many people probably had a similar story. I didn't know that it would be of any great value, but then it occurred to me that Ray and I are close to the same age. And although I'm older, I will admit, and that we both grew up in the Deep South, but we grew up in very different circumstances. And so actually Team Bunnelle came up with that idea and thought that it would be more interesting to have a comparison of our growing up experiences than just for me to yammer on about mine. And Ray was gracious enough to say that he would. Of course, I owe him a lot, but and Tracy too, but hopefully it'll be more interesting this way.
Well, for those of you who do not know Ray personally, I'll have to tell you that he is an oak tree in the Georgetown community and very much admired and looked up to. And so I know that you're going to gain a lot from hearing his story. And he also has a wonderful, sharp sense of humor. So Ray, we hope that you share that as you share your story as well. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the intro, and I appreciate having the opportunity to share with Geales this morning. Actually, as I listened to Geales this morning, we are diametrically the opposite growing up. Her life was on one side of the track and I was on the other side of the track, literally. As I listened to Geales this morning talk about how she grew up, I probably grew up just the opposite of it. Well, my dad and I grew up here in Georgetown. I grew up primarily in the rural parts of Georgetown in Plantersville. And Plantersville is a real insulate community, rural community, and we kind of live among each other, family members in our village. I live particularly in Jackson Village in Plantersville, and my dad and mom were good people. My dad had a third grade education. He worked most of his life at the International Paper Company and provided for his family. He also was like to think he was a farmer, but we did all the work. And I'll talk about that later on, about farming in Georgetown. And my mom, she was the Hattie. She primarily worked at home, but she had a gig at one of the local plantations and served in the capacity of the Hattie that Geales referenced before. I grew up with 7 brothers and sisters. One of my brother passed away back in 1992, and he's primarily the reason why I'm back in Georgetown. Because when I grew up in Georgetown, my plan was to leave Georgetown and never come back, other than to come and visit my parents. Because centrally, I felt that there was no place or no opportunity for me to succeed professionally. So I didn't have any plans to return. Well, as fate would have it, that didn't work out as I originally planned. But I grew up here in Georgetown, and I went to a local elementary school, all Black. We had a very interesting lifestyle. We went to the high school, middle school was all Black. And then I think around my 10th grade, we began to have some white teachers from up north that came down that helped us along the way. And the funny thing, I still have a professional relationship with several of those teachers that came to our school back in the early 70s to help educate us. They had a vested interest, and it was very obvious that they did. And so that was very impactful to me. As I mentioned earlier, I have a large family, and my dad needed to find some alternate ways to support his family. So he had, he didn't have a farm, but he had a lot of fields that would, I guess, constitute a farm in some respect. But he had enough work to keep us busy. As the other kids in our village would go around having fun, playing basketball or just walking around, we were always engaged in some meaningful task. Either, and my dad had a mule back in those days, and I was the primary plow guy. So my job was to operate the plow. However, my dad, at my senior in high school, he decided that since I was leaving, it was time for him to replace me with a tractor. So that was okay. It was okay. But we had tobacco, which we harvest tobacco. We had cucumber as well. In fact, I'm still protesting that work, because that was really a backbreaking job to pick cucumber, and I'm protesting today for those persons who have the responsibility of picking cucumber. That's a job and a half. Tobacco wasn't bad, cotton wasn't that bad, but cucumber was terrible because you had to always, from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, always in a downward bending position, and it was really numbing. My dad had a system in our cucumber field. Each one of our sisters, and my grandmother, she was there with us. She was always there in the fields with us. But my daddy had a numbering system. You know, we had about 4 of us in the field, 5 of us in the field, and everybody had their own individual roles. So if you missed a cucumber, 2 days later, you can see a very enlarged cucumber, because we grew pickled cucumber for the most part. And he would always know that if you did a sloppy job, it was evident in a couple of days. And so we always was trying to do a good job to make sure my dad was happy. He was not a supervisor in his job, but he wanted to be a supervisor in those fields. And that's what he did. He didn't do very much work, but he was supervising. And I always remember that about my dad. He always liked to supervise and give directions and orders, but not very much work. But that's okay. He was a supervisor. So we grew up, we had a good time as kids. We had, I think from a family unit, we were well fed. We had a decent living, and my dad provided, and my mom was a good mother, and she provided a lot of love and care. I grew up, my dad had one white friend, one guy, Mr. Giroux. He and my dad, I guess, kind of grew up together, and they remained friends through their lifetime. And even today, that family and us, we still are very good friends, even though Mr. Giroux and my dad has passed away. My mother and Mrs. Giroux is still alive, and we often visit each other at their homes or at their convalescing place. Life for me in Georgetown was such that when I grew up, I knew that I needed to find a way to make my life a lot easier. My older brother went to school. He studied engineering, and he convinced me or suggested to me that I consider something similar. So I did. He was electrical. I studied civil, and he really was a good thing for me to follow his leadership, because my life has changed, and I'm very happy that with the upbringing that we had, hard work and commitment to a challenge followed me throughout my entire life, in college, professionally, and otherwise, just working in the community. I think my servant leadership skills comes from knowing that we are here in this community, in this world, sharing, and we need to do our part to leave a legacy that's positive and not necessarily negative. That's a snippet of my background, and we could certainly elaborate further as we move along this discussion today. Thank you.
Those are great words to live by, I think, Ray, that we always want to make a positive impact. And as I was listening to your story, I think all of our hearts go out to little boy Ray that had to pick all those cucumbers. I don't know if you can even put them on your salads these days, but we all feel for that backbreaking labor that you had to endure as a young man. But I'm sure that it built character. One of the most fascinating things about being a part of this conversation is being able to reflect on the fact that Geales and Ray come from such different backgrounds, but they ended up here together in the same place. I wonder if both of you could very briefly reflect for a minute or so on what your parents actually taught you about race. Did they tell you anything explicitly about race, or did you pick up most of those lessons just through examples? Jill?
I would say that I picked those up through example. And, people do the best they can with what their resources are. And my parents were raised in a generation where, my mother's grandfather fought in the Civil War. So they grew up my mother grew up in South Mississippi, and my father grew up in Southwest Georgia. And they had Hatties in their life. My father had Amy, who he loved dearly and looked after her and kept up with her till the day she died. and my mother had Blanche. So, you know, nobody ever said we're better than. It was just the way we lived. And, you know, I don't think we ever had a conversation about, I don't remember ever having any kind of conversation about race. I come from a family of people who avoid confrontation at all costs. So we never talked about ticklish things like that.
Mhm. So your teaching about race was pretty much through example. Ray, what did your parents tell you about race?
Well, you know, I had I had two grandmothers, but one of them really was a little closer to the family because she lived in closer proximity to us than my other grandmother, who lived in town, so to speak. Um, my grandmother would always tell me, Ray, son, you have to always watch your company and be careful how you associate yourself with people, you know. And, you know, my dad would always tell me, son, look a person in his or her eyes. That's very important. And, you know, my dad, you know, again, my dad would always talk about the job that he had, the experiences that he had on job, how he was discriminated for job opportunities, and what he would do to be able to work around that and find ways to be able to provide better for his family. You know, I know he had a lot of challenges on his job because he wasn't happy there. He couldn't wait until he got the age of retirement. On the day of retirement, he left because he was done. He was done, you know, and didn't have any other meaningful income. But he said that I'll make it do. I'll make do with it because he didn't want to endure that any further. So he kind of sheltered us from a lot of that. You know, when we went to town, we live in the country. We go to town, we buy groceries, in Georgetown, we had King Street. King Street is where all of the Black businesses were located. And we generally go there and park there and get out and then do our shopping and our other community, you know, I guess, uh, um, engagement on King Street in Georgetown. King Street is a little different now, not that much, but it's different now. But as I recall, when I was a kid, that was the heart of the Black community, and Front Street was not necessarily the place that you want to go because you weren't necessarily welcome. I recall, going to the doctor's office and having, you know, the colored section and the other section, and I just think that, you know, race for me was something that was, you know, I didn't have a problem. I didn't personally have any discriminatory action taken upon me as a kid, but I know my dad did. And I felt that in his actions to us. And he kind of, I guess, took out all of that anxiety on us, you know, I think, you know, so I guess it manifests itself through his kids. But, you know, the fact of the matter is it really helped build character.
Mhm.
Help us to understand the bigger picture and to find a way to work through and around those challenges in life. And I think I think that what we learn as youngsters really has manifested itself in all of us, and we all are being able to have a very decent life and not be as challenged as my dad and mother had when they grew up.
Thank you for sharing that, Ray. I absolutely agree with you that our early experiences really do have a major impact on who we become as adults and what we decide to pursue with our lives and with our gifts. We're about halfway through our conversation here. Let me pause and check in with Alex. Alex, are there any questions in the chat so far that we can pose for Geales and Ray?
There currently aren't any questions, but if anyone has some, they can put them in the chat, or I invite them to just raise their hands and speak.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. So Geales and Ray, I think both of you indicated when you talked about your childhood that life was pretty insular for you in terms of race. Like the people that you really spent time with on a familiar kind of basis were people who shared your same race, some of your same experience and background. Could you talk to us a little bit about how, as you matured, you began to open your circle and include other people from outside of your race or your background? Let's start with Geales.
Oh, after I graduated from LSU, I moved to Virginia for graduate school, and then I entered the work world in Virginia. And in the early 80s, I worked for the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. We built aircraft carriers and fast attack submarines. And I was one of 25,000 employees. The vast majority of those were men. It was at the shipyard that I experienced discrimination myself. So this was a misogynistic environment that I had never seen anything like it. I was totally unprepared for the challenges that were there. I'd never really been exposed to anything close to that. I mean, I had always sort of surrounded myself, I guess, with people like me. And this was the first time that I had really, even at LSU, you know, everybody kind of looked like me, but not at the shipyard. So I was totally unprepared for these challenges, and I've never really ever experienced anything since then. I was valued for my college degree and my command of the English language, but my pay was a fraction of my male counterparts who had gone straight from high school, usually to be a submariner, or they used to call them bubbleheads, and then they went straight to the shipyard. The verbal harassment was constant. The inappropriate conversations were constant. And then there was this alarm that sounded at the beginning of the workday, at the beginning of the lunch hour, the end of the lunch hour, and the end of the workday. It kind of reminded you that you were in a factory. I mean, it was more like a factory than a school. So working there was my first taste of being marginalized myself. And although I know now that it was a valuable experience, I can't say that I enjoyed it. My next job was at Colonial Williamsburg, where I was one of 3,300 employees. And I like to describe this experience as exchanging crass for class. Many of my fellow employees at Colonial Williamsburg were highly educated. And I was hired as the manager of office services, which was an internal department that provided support to all the other people. And I supervised 15 employees, most of whom were men and women of color. And most of them had worked for Colonial Williamsburg for 3 or 4 decades. I oversaw the mailroom, where the supervisor of the mailroom had worked for Colonial Williamsburg longer than I had been alive. It quickly became clear to me that many of my employees were routinely treated poorly by our colleagues in the museum. And because they were the mailroom staff, I noticed that my employees were treated as less than by our coworkers. Now, my staff worked hard. They kept their heads down and they didn't rock the boat. They had been in this environment far longer than I had, and they valued their jobs, and they let the poor treatment that they routinely receive roll off their backs. I wasn't having that. So I set about to do what I could to right the ship and improve their lot. Without going into detail, I know that this experience, coupled with my own experience at the shipyard, opened my eyes and turned me into an advocate for equity. And I would say that by the time I got to Georgetown County, the person that moved to Georgetown County was very different from the person who grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So because of the experiences I'd had. And, you know, because I got involved with the nonprofit world when I first got here, that just became my world, which is a much more diverse and intricate world than the privileged white Jim Crow world that I started off in.
Thank you, Geales. In the conversations that we had leading up to today, I believe that I found out a couple of things that I didn't know, and it seems as if you really spent a lot of your time and energy diversifying the board of directors there at the Bunnelle Foundation, and I imagine that that might be as a result of some of the experiences that you just mentioned. So thank you for talking about that. We'll circle back to that in a second. Ray, I do have a different question for you. Before we move on from the childhood conversation, I do want you to maybe share with the audience today the experience that you told us about earlier with your mom and that side gig that you mentioned earlier, being there on the plantation. Could you talk about that for a minute? Do you remember that story that you told us, Ray?
Yeah, I do. And thank you for reminding me of that. So my mom, she did work for a local plantation, at a local plantation with the family. Is actually still owners now, actually. And, I would, the things that I remember that was profound for me and my family is that during the holidays, the owner of the plantation would invite his workers and their families to gather around the back front porch facing the river, and while he distributed bags of apples and oranges and candy to his subjects. That experience really is, I was very vivid for me as a kid. I don't have a lot of recollection of stuff that I did as a kid, but that was I don't know why it stuck with me, but it has, and it kind of reminded me of, as I do research now, of how things used to be and how he wanted things to be continued, that he wanted us to, gather around his veranda and just pay homage to him and his family, as he provided us some apples and orange and candy. But at the time I was grateful because we didn't have that, so it was more than we had at home, and so we thought nothing of it. So but as we reflect and see how things were happening, or how we were being handled, and everything is done for a reason, and subconsciously we think about those things. That one has stuck with me after all these years, many years, a long time. And so I'm just happy that, even today, I have a total different relationship with his kids, so we have a much more professional relationship, and much more, it's different from what we did in the past, and we have created some partnerships, actually, because he recognized that Ray is potentially on par with me, and I can share with him, and I can ride in his corporate jet to places, and I could enjoy some of the amenities that he would probably never had my dad enjoy, and have conversations with him about business and opportunities that we could share and be a part of. So, on one hand, we grew up through that lifestyle, but you have to take the vinegar and try to, with lemon, to make lemonade out of it. Right? That was always important for me to recognize that there's an opportunity. It may appear to be bitter right now, but what can you do to improve that situation? So the work that we're doing in this community right now is about that. Is about preparing our young people for the inevitable. Is that we want them to be able to have a good quality of life, and that comes from doing what you need to do and preparing yourself so your families could have a better standard in life and be able to be an asset to our society. So we're teaching that now with our young people in this community to be self-sufficient and be able to contribute to our society. And so I think all of those experiences I've had really helped mold me to be able to make some of the decisions I'm making now.
Ray, I appreciate your willingness to tell that story. I think that what you speak about echoes what Geales was saying about the people with whom she worked and the people that she supervised. And it seems that both of you recognized that there were inequities in your midst, that there was institutionalized racism, and it just really fascinates me. It amazes me to reflect on the fact that now you're here together in the Georgetown community working to make a change. Geales, how is this even possible?
Well, you have to believe that it is, but you read the paper every day and you're made aware of things that are present that shouldn't be. And so trying to figure out how to conquer that is what I think about all the time. And there's no easy way. I mean, we have around here what we call the plantation mentality. Everybody's very polite on the surface, but we know who's in charge and they like it that way, and nothing's going to change until the people in power change. So we have to work however we can to make sure the right people get elected to the school board or to the county council or to people who might think more broadly than the plantation mentality.
Definitely. Well, it seems as if you've really woven a very deliberate and intricate thread here with your two stories. You've told us about where you started and how your views about working with other people in the community were formed. And then you told us about how you opened your circle. You've even mentioned, you've alluded to the fact, Geales, that we need to challenge the status quo if we want to see any change. I'm going to pause again here and ask Alex to let us know if there have been any questions added to the chat that we can present here for Geales and Ray.
Yes, we have one from Erica Wooten. This is for Geales, I'm sorry. It is, what was her evolution in her understanding of the impact of race, and how do these lessons inform her and guide her today?
It's interesting. I went to my high school reunion this past weekend. It was my 50th high school reunion. And we actually sat around where I was staying with two friends, and talked about our growing up and how different it was from the way we raised our children. Because we didn't have Hatties. And, we taught our children to do things that we were never expected to do. So that's one thing that, as you grow up and you have broader experiences, I think for me, getting out of the cocoon of my hometown, and Shreveport, Louisiana wasn't a small rural community. Shreveport, Louisiana was a city of 180,000 people, but it was still you hung around with people like yourself. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Repeat it for me.
It was, what was her evolution in understanding of the impact of race, and how do these lessons inform her and guide her today?
I guess a blinding flash for me was working at Colonial Williamsburg and watching these highly educated people treat my employees as if they were their personal servants. And I couldn't believe it, because I was way beyond that by the time I got there. And I thought, what is going on here? And, it was little things that I had to stand up for them. And, the greatest compliment that I had was the man who'd worked for Colonial Williamsburg for longer than I'd been alive. When he retired, at his retirement party, he told me in his 47 years of working at Colonial Williamsburg, I was the only person he had enjoyed working for. Now that, I mean, it's a nice compliment for me, but it doesn't say much about all the other supervisors that he had in 47 years, does it? So, you know, I was just trying to do basic, treat people like you want to be treated stuff. And that just wasn't happening. And it was mesmerizing to me and horrifying. I mean, I had an employee that delivered the mail one day and then drove himself to the fire station to get his blood pressure checked because he thought he was having a heart attack. He did. But he delivered the mail first. You know, and I'm thinking, my gosh, you know, take care of yourself. Gracious me. So I don't know. Next question.
Well, thanks for that explanation about your evolution, Geales. And Erica, thank you for sharing that question as well. It looks like, I know that we could spend hours and hours talking about this topic, and I can't believe that the time is moving along so quickly. We're about 10 minutes away from turning this back over to Together SC. But I want to ask this final question for Geales and Ray both. I know that Together SC is making a concerted effort to share lots of resources for people who would like to diversify their own nonprofit experiences, diversify their communities and their lives, and open their circles. Ray and Geales, what advice do you have for that reluctant nonprofit leader who doesn't necessarily is considering stepping into the waters of this conversation, but is just on the fence? What advice do you have for them moving forward? Ray, what are your closing thoughts here?
A very good question. I think if you are a leader of an organization and have a desire for your organization to grow, you have to lead people. And when I say people, and have partnerships that you may not have even thought about. You can't be selfish or have one track mind thinking, because when you do it, you limit yourself to one thing or one resource. When the world is at your disposal, your world happens to be your domain, you must think in terms of what's out there, and that I have to be able to latch on to be able to help my organization become stronger. And so when you move away from that, then you can understand the importance of everyone, including everyone, as you plan and execute, and not limiting yourself to one group of people, because when you do that, you just have a one-track mind. Rather, you want to be inclusive and have others who may have a different thought, who may have other resources that you never even thought of before. So I think it's important for organizations who have a vision to move forward and be sustained in the future, is to be able to open your minds, convince your board of directors and other volunteers to be willing to accept the opinion and thoughts of other people around your table. It's important to have varied opinions. Sometimes they're a little different from the others, but hell, that comes with the territory. But sometimes there's something good in that, of having a different opinion, so you can, work through and find new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Geales, what advice do you have?
You know, when I came to work for the Bunnelle Foundation 18 years ago, the board was 5 elderly men, white, 5 white elderly men, and I was the only employee. And, it took a while because it wasn't within my power to change the board. The board was appointed by others, but I figured out that you could change the minds of the people that were making those decisions. So although it was clearly not my decision to make, I certainly had influence, and that's what I figured I had to do. And I will say that through the years, I mean, it was a big deal when we got a woman on the board. So, I mean, we're talking frozen in the past here. So we encourage the nonprofits that we fund to do the same thing. You know, we always ask them, do you have some of the people that you serve on your board? Because for a nonprofit, that could be, you know, if you're the Smith Medical Clinic, wouldn't it be great to have somebody who's been a patient at the Smith Medical Clinic on your board to help you make decisions and understand, you know, don't make decisions about me without me. So, you know, we try to encourage nonprofits to do that, to have diversity on their own boards and in their own staffs. So, and I can't try to influence people to do that if we're not doing it ourselves.
Thanks for leading by example, Geales. That's really very important. Alex, I did see that another question popped up in the chat box. Is that right?
Yes, we have 2 more questions. How do you navigate community conflicts together, like the pimento cheese issue?
For those of you who don't know what she's talking about, I believe it was last September, September of 2021. No, maybe it was September of 2020.
2020.
The mayor of Pawleys Island, an elected official, posted on Facebook a racist rant that went on and said Black Lives Matter was terrorists, and just went from there, and just felt totally comfortable having this huge rant on Facebook for all to see. Well, it went around the community quickly. And the reason she calls it the pimento cheese talks is because the mayor of Pawleys Island is also the owner of Palmetto Cheese and the Seaview Inn and Get Carried Away. So it became quite the community conversation. And Costco quit carrying Palmetto cheese as a result. And a lot of stores pulled Palmetto cheese from their shelves. And my family and I vowed we would never eat Palmetto cheese again. So, but, you know, and then I will tell you that the mayor of Pawleys Island ran for re-election and was totally re-elected. So, granted, there are only 125 voters on Pawleys Island. So, but still, the fact remains that I believe that the mayor of Pawleys Island, although he later took that down off Facebook, I know that's his opinion, and I know that a lot of people agree with him, but they're just quiet about it. And that's what we have to work with in our community. And that's one of the reasons we've hired Charles Weathers to come and teach this Leading and Engaging Across Differences series that we're offering it twice a year. And we've invited all the city council members and all the county council members. Now, I can't tell you they all come, but they've certainly been invited. And, you know, we're trying to broaden the conversation through that. Ray, do you have anything to say about the Palmetto cheese issue?
Judge, you did an eloquent job of summarizing and sharing what occurred here in Georgetown a couple years ago. You know, Black lives do matter, and I think that as an elected official, you have to be very careful about what you say. But if you have a constituency that supports those kinds of rhetoric, well, we know how it works. It's who are you speaking to? Are you not? And what problems are you creating for your community when you say things that you probably should not have said? You know, but you're saying what you believe. That's important. It's always important to be honest with yourself. But at the same time, we have to be mindful with other people. So you got to be careful what you say and how you say it because it impacts other people greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And I know we're running short on time, but here's the question that's at the top of my mind. What if there were a board member at the Bunnelle Foundation that really supported the mayor's point of view? How would that be handled within the boardroom? But I won't ask you to elaborate on that right now. We'll have that private conversation offline if you'd like.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then lastly, this one is for Ray. Can you share quickly some of the organic conversations about race that that have emerged in your community between those with plantation mentalities?
Well, you know, and Jill was right. There are people still with the plantation mentality in 2022. But you have to work through that. You know, I'm confronted with that because our business, our nonprofit is based in the country near those plantations. And so, you know, I'm a big partnership guy. And I think it's important for me to have a conversation with people with different opinion of the community, of me, to share with them how important it is for us to understand that this world is for us to share. No one has any authority or any power to control anyone else. So I think it's important for the organic conversation is simply that we have to communicate. We have to understand that we all have differences of opinion and sit down at the table and discuss them and be able to allow another person with a different opinion to say what they need to say, but yet you get a chance to say what you need to say and hopefully come to some reasonable conclusion to help the community. But it's all about the community. It's not about me. It's not about that person who may have a plantation mentality, but it's what is in the best interest of this community. Thank you.
Well, I'm seeing all kinds of accolades roll in for Geales and Ray. I truly have been blessed to be a part of this conversation today. So many insights, so much courage, so much inspiration. Geales, you were invited to be a part of removing our blinders because obviously your light shines so brightly throughout the state of South Carolina. I want to give you the final word here. What do you want to say to end this conversation before we hand this back over to Mary Dell? Thank you both for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share in this very special occasion with you. Geales?
You know, I think it's so important that we think about the other shoes that people are walking in, and that we realize that yelling and screaming is not the way to change things. But, you know, don't change the volume, change the argument. You know, we need to work on this so delicately, but we have to work on it together, and we have to work on it with people that we don't necessarily agree with. So I think trying to make yourself aware of how other people view things is so important, and to be sensitive to that. And it's so hard, but you know, that's the only way we're going to move forward, and we really need to move forward. But I realize we have to do it incrementally, and patience is not one of my virtues. I've got to tell you. I mean, take that up with Hattie too. But I just really, really want to see our community make a difference. And I really believe that we can do it, but we cannot do it individually. We have to do it together. We have to figure out that path.
Geales, I believe with you. And I think that there are many people on this call that also stand with you. And I believe we will see a change if all of us are as dedicated and devoted and deliberate as you and Ray. So thank you again. Mary Dell?
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much, Geales and Ray, for being part of this conversation here with us today. It's so powerful to think about. So many of us are lifelong South Carolinians or Southerners, and we certainly have a long way left to go in our journey together on this path towards equity. We hope that you'll be back in this space with us on May 4th, about a month from now, with our own Madeline McGee and Mayor Joe Riley to continue this conversation, to learn more about Joe's path and the work that's been done to revitalize Charleston. We are so grateful for your time today. Please keep your thoughts and prayers with our friends and brothers and sisters down in Allendale as they clean up from the storms yesterday. Please be safe today as more storms head our way. And we really appreciate your membership and your participation with Together SC. Again, please make sure that your profiles for your organizations and your colleagues are up to date in Member Compass. Join the peer networks. Be part of great conversations with these that are happening across the state as we work to build more vibrant, equitable communities. We are so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much for being here, and we will look forward to seeing you soon. Alex dropped the link to the next Removing Our Blinders in the chat. Feel free to click on that, go ahead and register, put it on your calendar, save the date, and we will look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much, everyone.